Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone. Just a note of housekeeping here while we're getting settled in. We've got you in these groups, but the groups won't really talk amongst yourselves till after lunch today. So those of you who have your backs turned, feel free to move them around or anything you want to do to make it a little more comfortable for yourself. The sun is right here in your eyes, so you might want to back it up. You'll be, until lunch, you'll be, your back will be turned if you're sitting that way. So go ahead and fix that if you'd like. And then a couple of housekeeping items. You all probably know it. Through this back door on the right here is the restrooms. There's coffee back there. At our morning break, we'll have some snacks and that sort of thing. And then lunch, and then also stuff for the afternoon. Let's see, the Wi-Fi password, right, Kelly, is a super, super clever professional password. It's, what is it, Kelly? You can tell me, I'll repeat it.
New Year Whoopie.
With an H or just a W?
W-H-O-O-P-I.
Okay, so it's New Year Whoopie. We did not come up with this. New Year Whoopie, New Year, and then W-O-O-P-I-E. Oh, P-I.
P-I-E.
P-I-E.
Yeah.
W-O-O-P-I-E if you need a Wi-Fi.
W-H-O.
They're excited here at the Lander Civic Center, apparently. Okay, well, we still have some people struggling in here, and here's the outline for the day, folks. You should have gotten a agenda coming in. We're obviously starting a little bit late as everyone was working their way through the registration table. So I'm going to truncate some of my remarks so that we can get back on schedule. I'm pretty stickler for respecting everyone's time. We said we'll be done by 4. We will be done by 4, without a doubt. We want to start out this morning just with a few introductions, and then we'll go right into it. First of all, my name is Pete Obermueller. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. If you are not familiar with us or have not had dealings with us, the WCCA is a private nonprofit organization that represents the boards of county commissioners in all 23 of Wyoming's counties. 91 commissioners, 1 voice. We have several commissioners in the room today, but I'm just going to introduce a couple folks myself, and then we'll go around the room and do real quick introductions. I want to introduce first the president of the WCCA. It's a very glamorous job. It involves coming over here at 6:30 a.m. to help set up and run the registration table. Richard Ladwig in the back there from Niobrara County, Chairman of Niobrara County Commissioner, is the president of the WCCA. And interestingly, he informed me this morning, I didn't realize this either, but in terms of BLM surface and subsurface ownership, Niobrara has more than Weston and Crook County combined. So that's an interesting note I didn't even realize. staff I want to introduce first is our natural resource staff attorney, Gregory Cowan. He's standing in the back here. If you need something today, Gregory's, or anytime, Gregory's your go-to guy. We'll note that I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. So at 4 o'clock today, when this meeting ends, my attention will pivot 100% to the state legislature until the end of the session. So Gregory's going to be the guy on this for that time when I have to go into the trenches for a while on those issues, which will be fun. And then also Kelly Little in the back here. Kelly Little is our communications coordinator, our event planner, our IT person, our all-around make everything run well person. Kelly's going to be up here. We said we're webcasting. She's going to be running that, and also dealing with the food and all that stuff. So talk to Kelly if you need anything there. Okay, here's what we're going to do, guys. I want to just go around real quick and just make sure that everyone knows who's in the room and who's represented. Most of you, if you registered, you'd already received a list of the people who had registered. We have some people who came without registering. I just want to go around the room real quick. Just stand up, tell us who you are and who you are representing, whether it's a county or an NGO or an industry or anything like that. Please let us know. We'll do that as quickly as we can. I'll have some opening remarks and then we'll go to our first panel. So we'll start over here with this table. We'll just go back this way and around. Go ahead, Terry. Terry, tell the group your name.
Terry Wolf, Washington County Commissioner.
Oh, and say it really loud. I'm not going to pass the microphone around.
Loud enough?
Steve Smutko, University of Wyoming Arkansas House Institute.
John Griffith, Wyoming Scott Bird Association.
Paul Spitler with the Wilderness Society. Scott Christensen with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition.
Terry Ruth, Northwest Wyoming OHV.
Jill Tom, Rock Mountain Elk Foundation.
Wayne Carlick, Northwest OHV Club.
East Graham, Wyoming Catholic.
You guys speak up. Amanda Gary, Mountain Bike Pecans.
Evan Raimondo, National Outdoor Leadership School.
Western Basin, Jacksonville Conservation Alliance.
Good morning, Paul Vogelheim, Teton County Commissioner.
Good morning, William Dorsey, Wyoming chapter of the Sierra Club.
Chris Colligan, Greater Yellowstone Coalition.
Mark Newcomb, Teton County Commission.
Don Schramm, Rock Springs Grazing Association.
Dennis Ellis, Anadarko Petroleum.
Roger Hayes, Wyoming Wildlife Outfits.
I'm Barry Riceley, back from the
Connie Wilbert, Sierra Club Wyoming chapter.
Jim Floyd, Wyoming Federation of Union Sport. Wally Johnson, Chairman of the West County Commission and also Chairman of WSCI.
My name is Travis McNevin. I am Southern Nebraska's State Natural Resource Advisor.
Hi, Shanny Anderson, Wyoming Wildlife Federation. Leah Burgess, Rock Mountain Foundation.
Dick Loper, Wyoming State Grazing Board.
Over here.
Matt Arnett, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership.
Rob Davidson, Council for the Bighorn Range.
Bradley Lee, Council for the Bighorn Range.
Don Priscillius, I'm with the Wyoming Wilderness Association.
Matt Avery, Campbell County Commissioner.
Wilbert, Wyoming chapter of the Sierra Club.
Jessica Clemens, Representative Institute, University of Wyoming.
Kevin Lynn, Powder Recreation Resource Council. Derek Pilgrim, Wilderness Society.
Wyoming Farm Bureau.
Dan Blakely, Western County Commission. Katie Gill, Wyoming Outdoor Association.
Jim Hicks, Johnson County District.
Steph Kessler, Wyoming Outdoor.
Morning, Mark Ward from Utah Association of Counties.
Joe Parsons, SDR Conservation District.
John Espy, Chairman of Carbon County Commission.
Greg McReynolds, Travel Unlimited.
Emmett Nelson, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Cheryl Kaiser, Jefferson City Alumnus Society.
Kenny Bearden, Overland Mountain Bike Club.
Rich Lewis, Morning, I'm Jessica Crowder, Policy Advisor. Good morning, please continue with the
Joel Osmond, Suffolk County Commission.
Tim Young with Wyoming Pathways. Barry Molnar with Wildlife Guardians.
Jim Brass, backcountry hunters and anglers.
Good morning, Sandy Kennedy, Forest Service Liaison, Jessica Cheyenne.
Peter Angst, Wilderness Society.
And Sarah with Sandra Gillis.
Terry Ewing, Lehigh County Commission.
Immediately, Sarah Walls, Wyoming County Commission.
Aaron Anderson, Washington County Commission.
Line Fobio, National Landscape Conservation System Lead, White Oak State Office, BLM, which covers. Welcome.
Good morning,
I'm Scott Bossy with American River.
Lucky Hall, Park County, Wyoming.
Jim Burton, Wyoming Backcountry Horseman.
Kelsey Beck, Motion Conservation System, representing Wyoming.
Good morning, Tasha Sorensen, Travel Limited.
Terry Carmen, Lincoln County Commission. Ken Carmen, Lincoln County Commissioner and Chairman of the Coalition of Local Governments.
Carolyn Schroeder, Wyoming Wilderness Association.
Richard Garrett, Nature Conservancy.
Rob Hendry, Wyoming County Commissioners Association Vice President and the Trumbull County Commission.
Jason Gutierrez, Trumbull County Planning and Development Director.
Al Salmons, Backcountry Horseman, Winter Jacket.
Morris Chadwick, Chairman of the Wyoming County Commission.
John Lawson, Troy County Commissioner.
Steve Scott, Yosemite National Forest, I'm with District Ranger.
Travis Becker, Wyoming County Commission.
Esther Wagner, Petroleum Association, Wyoming.
Nick Roberts, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Don Ray, the Wyoming chapter of the Oregon California Trails Association.
Sorry, Jessica, South Wilderness Society.
Morning, Sergio Maldonado, Tribal Liaison.
Paula McCormick from the Winter Visitors Council. We are the lodging tax entity for Fremont County, and we were in my hometown. Welcome. Julia Stewart with the Wyoming Network. Jackie King with Congressman Cynthia Willis Office in Toronto County.
Pat Wade, Nyberg County Commissioner.
Great. I think that's everyone, and that is quite a diverse group. We really appreciate you all taking the time to come over today. A few things on your table. Some of you have noticed the Wyoming Public Lands Handbook. That's a publication that we printed a couple of months ago. Those are free for you to take if you would like those. There's an insert there too about wilderness study areas and wilderness areas that pulled from that that add a few more details that you can take as well. Okay. So folks, I don't know about you, but I'm excited about this. I'm really excited about this. And I can sense in the room a little bit of, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here. Why do you drive all the way to this thing? I don't know what's going on. I get it. We haven't tried this. Nobody's tried this. The closest example we have is Eastern Utah, and I'm really thankful for Mark Ward coming over from Utah to talk to us about what's going on in Utah. But that's, that is 7 counties. Eventually, I don't know how many counties will end up participating in Wyoming, but maybe similar to that, maybe bigger. But regardless, we haven't tried this here. And so the question is really, why did you make this drive? Why are we here? What are we doing? And to kick that off, I just want to ask you just a simple question with respect to federal lands and our federal lands designations in Wyoming. The question is status quo okay with you? Just want to let that sink in for a minute. Think about your county and the designations in your county, if you have WSAs or not. Is the status quo of the designations in your area of interest, is the status quo okay with you? And if the answer collectively is yes, Great, they'll get the caterer to have lunch, we'll go home. That'll be fine. We can just wrap it up. But I would argue that, that no, status quo is not okay. Status quo is not where we want to be, where we can be in Wyoming. We have a lot of potential here, and the status quo doesn't quite get us there. For one thing, here's what we all share. There's a lot of diversity in this room, from commissioners, industry, conservation groups, and all sorts of land on all sorts of ends of the spectrum and everywhere in between, even within the commissioners and in the NGOs and industry. But there's a few things we share. One of them is we all share the status of needing to ask for what we want with respect to federal lands. We all have our own missions, maybe our own individual opinions and goals about what our federal lands should look like. But we all share in this room, apart from the folks who are here from the agencies, we share the status of having to ask and fight, and in some cases beg for what we want. This opportunity, the WPLI and the way we have designed it, is an opportunity for us to design for ourselves what we want, and instead of asking for what we want, create what we want. Think about that for a minute. What we're talking about is an opportunity to create. You all know that at times the political winds change, right? You don't need to look any further than what's coming up on Monday in Iowa on both sides of the aisle about what's possible in the coming years for large national, international issues right down to federal lands. And the fact is, in the WSAs, they are, no matter what your desire for them is, they do not share a permanency that any one of us can rest on. So, if you think the status quo is okay, and you're totally confident that they'll always stay this way, great. Then you're fine. Maybe this process isn't the right way. But I would argue that at times the political winds change. And an opportunity to create for ourselves, with people in this room and every one of your constituents, whether your constituent is someone who voted for you, or whether your constituent is somebody who gives you money in a dues-paying organization, or is a shareholder in your company. The opportunity to create something meaningful in the face of rising conflict as it relates to federal lands is an amazing opportunity that we owe it to ourselves and to this state, to each other, to try to accomplish something. I look around at other states and other conflicts that are going on, and I think, is that the direction we head? I don't think so. I trust us more. I trust our ability to sit around these tables and find agreement. And I think we owe it to ourselves to do it. And speaking of agreement, here's been the interesting thing for me and for Gregory and for some of the others as this process has unfolded over time. We just by accident, I guess, have had the opportunity to have individual conversations with many of you, commissioners, NGOs and others. And what's really struck me the most is in these private conversations, people are a lot closer to agreement than they think they are. They tell me what they think, and then they say, but I know this group doesn't think that at all. And the other group tells me what they think, and they say, but I know that group doesn't think anything like what I think. Turns out there's not a ton of daylight in between those 2 points. There's more agreement than I think anyone really realizes. What the WPLI is at its core is a process for those groups to close that daylight and to find those areas of agreement and make a meaningful decision for the long term. How long ago was the Wyoming Wilderness Act? Who remembers? 1984, exactly. So 30 plus years. We could easily leave this meeting today and decide we're just going to let it go for another 30 years and leave it to our kids to try to do something else. That would be easy. I would argue that now is our time. It's been 30 years. We can do it again, and we should do it again. So I want to talk for just a couple of minutes here about how the WPLI, what it is functionally, how it came about, and then offer a couple of words of warning, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions, as I imagine there'll be some questions about the process. So I want to say at the outset with regard to WPLI, I wish I could say that in a moment of amazing inspiration, I woke up one morning and I thought, you know, it'd be great, we can put together this thing, you know, we'll all get together and we'll work something out. I can't take credit for that. This process has been developing for at least 4 years, if not longer, probably a lot longer, if you consider all the individual work you all have done over the years. But in terms of the WPLI process itself, it really started with a discussion over 4 years ago between the Wyoming delegation, the governor's office, and the counties, and some of you about, you know, is there a way that we can come together and have a locally driven effort to decide for ourselves how to designate these lands. So there's been a lot of people involved in this over time. It may seem to some who have not followed it that it just sort of sprung up out of nowhere, but it's really been it's been organic and it's been growing over time. It's just now that we're at this point where we can kick it off. So perhaps to answer the question, what is the WPLI? Let me just say 4 things about what it is not. The WPLI is not an effort at wholesale transfer of ownership of public lands. Now, when Mr. Ward gets up and talks a little bit about their draft discussion, you will see that in Utah they have some land conveyances and dealing with their checkerboard and some other things. County needed an airport, some land for an airport, that sort of stuff. Rationalization, but it is not an effort at wholesale transfer of ownership. On the other side of the coin, this is not an administrative effort. I said before, we're all in a position of having to ask for what we want. This is not an administrative effort to try to influence or ask for what we want. It's just creating what we want and then passing it as a law to tell the agencies what we want and how to do it from there. With that in mind, it's also not a wholesale departure from agency authority. We've obviously invited the agencies to be here. They will have to be an integral role. First of all, they have expertise that we all need. Second of all, they will be able to they'll be able to participate in ways that some of us can't in terms of recognizing what areas, the history of some areas, and what areas can look like X or Y, but maybe most notably about helping us understand the types of designations that aren't full wilderness, aren't full release, something else that's already within the agency structure that might work there. Finally, and maybe most importantly, and I want you to hear this loud and clear from me in particular, because the WCCA is the one that has launched this. This is not an exercise in ulterior motives. I'm happy to go have beer with anyone here and tell you my personal opinion about this place or that place or this policy or that policy. I have no shortage of those to tuck your off. But what we've designed at WPLI is not a predetermined outcome. It's a process that allows for everyone to come to the table in a consistent, meaningful way to decide what the outcome is. And so today, I don't want to get bogged down in the process. I think most of you, hopefully, you've all read the principles and guidelines. I don't want to get bogged down in the process. I want to get bogged down in the product. That's what we're about. End product, not the process. Well, I'm not here. I didn't set this up so I could somehow, we could maneuver some way to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. And if you are here representing an organization that has some sort of ulterior motive in this, cast it aside. Because we're going to need honesty and we're going to need openness to make this work. I want to focus on one particular functional item that I've had a lot of questions on, and then we can take questions. I want to focus on the county advisory teams in the principle and guidelines. Who's in, how do you get in, all that kind of stuff. You will notice, maybe to some of your frustration, that the principles and guidelines, though lengthy in number of words, is not very prescriptive in how you go about doing this. We did that on purpose because we believe in the ability of each county and their team to be flexible enough and creative enough to make it work for your team. And I think Commissioner Thompson from Fremont County in the second panel will talk a little bit more about this. He's already got some pretty interesting thoughts on how to put together a team like this. But the team doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be 50 people. It doesn't have to have, It doesn't have to have every single person who wants to be involved, doesn't necessarily need to be on the team, because the teams are going to be open anyway, and it doesn't preclude citizens or groups from whatever involvement they want to have in terms of input or proposals. In fact, I have right here on my desk, I'll probably make a lot of these available. I met for several hours, and so has Travis from Senator Brass's office with a fella who used to work in the Rollins BLM office back in the 70s and had a hand in designing a lot of, in drawing the boundaries of a lot of WCAs right now. So he's got maps of all WCAs overlaid with all sorts of things. He's got his own proposal that he wants to advance to some degree. And he's done an enormous amount of work on it, and just from the factual stuff, he's got a lot of stuff. His name is Vernon Lovejoy. We'll probably have him come talk to some of you. But he has his own proposal. He's going to advance it. I would expect you all and your groups and citizens and constituents to make proposals, to make suggestions. That's the point, is to have those. But you don't have to be on a county advisory team to do that. Second, the teams can be flexible. You could have a large team, but divide it into groups that are looking at different things and then come together later. It's designed to be flexible so you all can make the right decisions for yourself. The most important part, and I think Travis will get into this, is the consistency of the process. Because at the end of the day, this is not going to be easy. And there's no guarantee of success. You could create a very creative, perfect recommendation that the governor ultimately says, I don't make it. And then that's that. You could do the same, and the delegation could theoretically say, well, you don't like it, and then it doesn't get introduced. You could put together a team that's one-sided, and then other group back away. So there's all, obviously there's all sorts of speed bumps, all sorts of ways why it may not be successful. And it's important to know that going in. There's going to be tension. Always will be tension as it relates to public lands, I think. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be accomplished. 2 words of warning for you before I take questions. Even knowing all those things that might make it not work, I think it's a guarantee that it won't be successful if we're not honest about what we want from the process. And that's why we're convening this today, is to start to think about what you might want from a process like this. And secondly, a lack of consistency. If one county's group is made up of all industry and another county is made up of all NGOs, it'll be tough to advance a package like that. And so that's sort of, that plays into my final thought on this, the role of the WCCA. I understand that there's some concern about, why is it the WCCA is this? Why are you the gatekeeper or the referee? We're not really. We're not. Any one of us, the delegation, the governor, an NGO, could have done this, could have come up with this. From a county perspective, commissioners are elected in their county to represent all their constituents. In public lands counties in particular, they have a particular role to play there. It's the relationship with their constituents and the federal government. To us, it seems natural. But to us, it was very important to set up a process where you could discuss with everyone in your constituents how to do it. So the role we play is more of an umbrella rather than a referee. Yeah, we'll be monitoring how the groups look. So we can say to your county and your group, this looks good, but there might be a hole here from the off-road vehicle users, and I want to make sure they're engaged. Doesn't mean they have to be on the county advisory team, but you need to make sure they're engaged. We can see that from above with the help of the governor and the delegation. I think they'll talk about that too. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I want to just remind everyone that you're here, whether you're paid to care about these places, or you were elected to care about these places, or deep down you just personally care about these places. You're here because you care about them. And together, I think that we can actually move forward in a meaningful way. So with that in mind, I just want to open it up for about 5 or 10 minutes here of questions about details or process, and then we'll jump right here into our first panel. So Kelly has got a microphone. When you ask a question, we're going to wait for the microphone so everyone can hear it rather than the introduction. So open up the floor for any questions about process. county advisory teams, timelines, any of that kind of stuff.
The landowners of these public lands are all Americans, 300 million of them, of which about 500,000 live in Wyoming. How are these county processes going to account for the desires and interests of members of the public who use and desire and value these lands that don't happen to live in the county that's in process?
Also one more note, when you ask a question, remind everybody who you're with and who you represent. That's Eric Mulvar from Wildlife Guardians. You know, Eric, it's a fair question, and it's a fair question because, yeah, technically you're right. As public lands, they're owned by everybody. I would argue that as citizens of this state, we have both an extra ownership and an extra obligation, because we live and work every day. They're not a theoretical thing for us. And I say this with a background in DC, you know, from working in DC, where you know, several members and staff and others would say often, my constituents have no idea about public lands. They like knowing they're there. Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. But I think, and Travis will probably talk about this more, I think the legislative history shows that there is a deference. There's a deference to locally led decisions of a reasonable nature, even from people who are east of the Mississippi, who have no public lands, and when they think of public lands, all they picture is you know, the Grand Tetons. They don't have any sense of BLM, and they'll admit that. But there's a deference as long as the proposal is reasonable. And you raise a good point here. That's sort of critical for us to think about. We will be successful in this. We will be successful if we can keep our vision and our recommendations as Wyoming specific as we can. If we try to tackle national issues in a Wyoming specific lands bill, we won't get anywhere. Because I'm assuming, Eric, by you being here, that you'll talk to your people in DC at the end of the day and say, this was a locally agreed upon deal, and we're not going to stomp on it. Now, I wouldn't expect that if, as part of the deal, we said, you know, we're going to, whatever, I don't know what it is, you know, well, take one near and dear to my heart, I'll just be honest, near and dear to my heart, this recent coal moratorium. I'm very angry about that. I want that to go away. But if I tried in this process to overturn the coal moratorium, it's a national decision that would kill this project. And so I would expect that at the end of the day, a group like yours, if we keep it local, a group like yours, the Wilderness Society, and us, with folks like the Western Caucus, can say to them, it's a locally driven decision about how we want to manage these lands. It's reasonable, it's agreed upon by a broad range of people and groups. And for the most part, and history shows this, I think, in the legislature, people will back that. Other questions? Yes, ma'am, 1 second, the mic's coming your way.
Hi, Shammy Anderson, Wyoming Wildlife Federation. I have a question about the process. 2 years seems quite ambitious to cover 43 wilderness study areas, 23 counties. We just want to make sure we have adequate coverage in terms of these advisory committees and our representation. And can you just speak to that process? Is that set in stone, or is it possible that could actually be prolonged? And how can you assure that we will have adequate coverage in terms of our members?
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate that. A couple of things on that, on the process. It's a great question. First of all, we're very cognizant of the limited capacity of everyone in this process to be a part of this. The commissioners, the commissioner is a part-time job, and And even with that said, there's commissioners everywhere. But in terms of all of the groups, you all have one or two people. So we have to be cognizant of that. We haven't put a hard deadline in there. We've suggested some time, and we'll probably, over time, we'll suggest some benchmarks, some check-in times, and all of that. But we have to be cognizant and flexible of the ability of every group to be involved in the places they want to be involved in. Some of that might require some prioritization on your part and everyone's part. But this is an area I really want to concentrate on. We'll let this group over here do that and all of that. Now, I should also say, not every county is going to opt in. So it's at the end of the day, it's not going to be 23 counties. I already have 2 or 3 letters from counties that have said, really support this process, we're not going to be involved. They're mostly eastern counties that don't have a lot of public lands anyway. And so far, I think we only have official opt-in letters from 4 counties, several counties here today who are on the fence. We will make a decision. So, I hate to put any odds on it, but there's not going to be 23 counties. I can tell you that much for sure. And we will have to, it's part of the role of WCCA as the umbrella is making sure that we're not meeting at the same time, that the deadlines are flexible enough to allow for the meetings that need to happen. Does that answer your question?
Hi, I'm Scott Foster with American Rivers. My question is, in the Utah Public Lands Initiative, there are a lot of different components, including resolving WSAs, designating new wilderness, wild and scenic rivers, land conveyances. I was wondering if thematically, all of those issues should be on the table for this process as well, or if it's really going to be focused on WSAs. Thanks.
Great question, appreciate that. And I probably should have covered this in my remarks. I am a big proponent of big solutions. I think everything should be on the table at the start. And as groups need to back into agreements. The way I've talked about the WSAs themselves in this process is they serve as a launching pad and as an anchor. In Wyoming, we have the defined areas of WSAs. We have a little bit more flexibility on working on those in Utah. I think Mark will probably talk about this. But if we lock ourselves just into WSAs at the outset, we might be leaving on the table some directed management, some conveyances, some other administrative function that helps that group get to an agreement, get to yes, that you can't get to just by the boundaries of WSA themselves. And so there's a whole spectrum in there, and we've had this discussion a lot in the principles and guidelines document. We've set the 2 ends of the spectrum as we see them. For WSAs, full wilderness designation, what we term hard release, which is release back to multiple use mandate, plus restrictions on further lands with wilderness, managing for wilderness characteristics. Whole array of opportunities in there that are part of the Utah PLI in the conservation section of the Utah PLI that I think Mark and probably Paul will talk a little bit about. But some of those will require looking a little bit more broadly, and I think all of those should be on the table. In fact, that I think is the fun part, is really exploring those areas. So how many times, if somebody gives you 2 choices, do you want steak or do you want salmon? It's an easy choice. But if someone says, anything you want in the world for dinner, what do you want? Then you're like, why? That's where we are. The debate has been, wilderness, no wilderness. Now we're saying, everything is on the table. What do you want? What do you want for Wyoming? So, so that's the launching pad. The anchor is, at the end of the day, maybe a county or an area can't come to agreement on any of that stuff, but they can agree on a few WSAs. There's 45 WSAs in Wyoming. Say at the end of the day, an area only can solve 1 or 2 of those. It's just those boundaries. It's progress, better than we've done in 30 years. So I'll take that. I don't want to set that away either. So it's a launching pad. It's also an anchor.
Hey, Doug Thompson, Fremont County. Maybe back to the question about time frame. It's been my experience if a process lasts too long, it'll die. So what is the possibility, say, at the end of 3 years, there's, certain counties that have their proposals ready to go? What's the chance of a second bite at the apple?
If you're willing to wait 30 years for a second bite, I'm just kidding. It's sort of kidding, I guess. Let me take that in 2 points, Doug. You're exactly right. It can, if a county or a group or an area is really fast and come to an agreement and then it sits while everyone else kind of works out their issues, it can grow stale. And so we have to be cognizant of that. We haven't set these hard and fast rules. I'm hopeful that counties will make their decision whether they're in or out really in the next, the next month or so that these county advisory teams can start getting put together and they can start meeting this summer. If you don't, if you join in later, you're way behind. And if we end up with a group of counties or a group of agreement and we're ready to go, we'll have to make the collective decision whether we go or wait for that very reason. And some have said at the beginning of this, this is really big, this is kind of scary, why don't we just do a pilot project in one area? That's fine, we can start small, but my honest opinion is we do not have several bites at the apple. We can ask the delegation to do a one county bill, and they can work like heck, and they'll have to work like heck to get that through. And that'll be it. That'll be what we did. That'll be good, but it's not great. We can do better than that. That's why I want to start big and go smaller. So we'll have to make some tough choices later on. And I think, I'm hopeful that enough counties, enough groups, enough people in this room see the vision enough to join in soon and start down this kind of step-by-step process, form your teams, scope it out, start making some recommendations in the next year and the year after to develop the bill. Mark will talk about it, but it's been 3 years. They just had this discussion draft coming out now. It's a long, arduous, but it has to end at some point, or it'll just die in the line.
Al Salmons, backcountry horseman. These processes are often not inexpensive to conduct. I'd like to think about costs a little bit. Those responsibilities fall back to the individual counties, and there's some help from the state commissioners group. Can you address that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'll be interested to hear other people's thoughts on this. My thought on it is, this meeting here might be the most expensive thing we do. There will be some costs associated with visiting these places, and if you decide that you need an outside inventory or that kind of thing, maybe that's some costs. But sitting down at the table in the county library and looking at maps, which most counties already have, most of you NGOs and industry and everybody already have, and scoping these out, the meetings themselves I don't see as as much of a cost. There will be some cost. My view is that cost is not, it should not be borne entirely by the county. There are lots of interested stakeholders here. And if there is a cost, it should be as best as we can shared. But again, that will have to happen at the local level. I think one of the biggest questions is, what about a facilitator? What about a cost facilitator? Again, a facilitator may be necessary in some places at the end of the day. To get over the hump, or if there's there's zero agreement, it doesn't seem like there's any agreement, maybe a facilitator can help. I don't want to start there. I want to trust, I want to see if people sitting across the table can find areas of agreement on their own before we start having to shell out money for facilitators and that sort of thing. So it's perhaps not a satisfying answer, because I can't tell you this is going to be built. It'll probably be different in different places. But I just have a hard time seeing it being massive, quite frankly. I think Walter's next, and then we'll end with Tim.
As you know, Pete, there's, you said 44, we think there's 42 in the state of Wyoming. And that makes up 577,000 acres. And why it's important, Sweetwater County, I'm chairman of the Sweetwater County Commission, is 247,000 of those acres are in Sweetwater County. 13 WSAs in Sweetwater County. And for Eric's, he's sure you are in this Adobe town. is currently 87,000 acres. There originally, according to the bond, was set aside as 10,000 acres. And when you realize that 80% of Sweetwater County's federal lands and 40% of Sweetwater County's assessed valuation is oil and gas, and 80% of Sweetwater County's assessed valuation has to do with minerals, you can see why we're very, very interested in what happens to these WSAs. We think that some of them should be reserved as some other designation. They can't be a study area forever. We started this process in 2011, and we were asked by the governor to back off because he felt, and I think we agreed, that it should be done on a statewide basis. But we've been working on this for 5 years. We're ready to go forward with this. We understand who has to be involved in this. And we represent the people in Sweetwater County. And those are the ones we have to listen to. Eric's right about having a national, that there's a national interest in what goes on in the state of Wyoming with all of our federal land, because they belong to everyone. But if we don't do it, who's going to do it? We were elected to do it. We're going to do it. And we think that those counties that are affected by this are the ones that should take the lead on.
I tell you, I mean, if that doesn't make you excited, I mean, that makes me excited. And, you know, Sweetwater, just real quick, there's three or four Forest Service, can't always forget. There's 3 Forest Service WSAs too. So we already ran into that problem with our public lands handbook. We only put BLM in there, and then Forest Service people were not pleased. So there's 45 WSAs, 42 BLM, 3 Forest Service. That as it may. Ground zero really is Sweetwater County. More WSAs in Sweetwater County than any other county. And the idea that, not to mention the checkerboard, the Rock Springs Grazing Association, the private landowners like Anadarko, and Trona companies, and some of the others. The idea that maybe, just maybe, there's a way to rationalize that makes it that there's a way for every one of those groups to win. You don't win at all, but make progress. I think it's possible. I think it's really possible that each one of us could make strides towards what we want. If we can find that would be amazing. I mean, that would be something to write about. Some other schmo 30 years from now standing here talking about it. So I appreciate that. Well, I think Sweetwater is very interesting. Go here to Tim, and then we're out of time for questions, so we'll go right on to our panel after that.
Thank you, Tim Young with Wyoming Pathways. Love maps in it, and I'm hoping there could be 42 exceptional field trips where we could learn a lot more about these. But my question is regarding some of the WSAs and perhaps some of the other lands that might potentially be considered are not in just one county. They're actually might be in 2 and sometimes even in 3. How would these different county groups interact with their neighbors in collaboration as you've described it?
Yeah, great question, Tim. Thanks for that. Another great example there is Sweetwater and Fremont. They've got WSA that straddles those 2 counties, and they will have to. Their groups. Again, it's not prescriptive. The principles and guidelines do say that in those cases, the county groups need to have a joint recommendation on those. How you do that may look different. Perhaps Sweetwater County sets up a team that's really looking at Adobe Town, but they have a separate team that's doing that Northern County thing, and then they come together later. That's possible, but it is pretty clear that if you straddle, if you're going to deal with an area that's not in your county, you need to make sure that you're working with that other county. Now, the boundaries are the boundaries, and listening to Mr. Lovejoy talk about how those boundaries were set is a fascinating tale about the drawing of those boundaries. Let's all remember that the boundaries are just what Congress said they are. We can, if we decide the boundaries should look different, the boundaries can look different. It's whatever Congress says they are. So, there's a lot of flexibility there too. Okay, well, I appreciate that. We're gonna pivot right now to I'll ask the 4 panelists to come up here right now. We're gonna pivot up to the panelists, and then we'll take a break. Or should we?
Somebody's gonna
Feel free, folks, at any time. No one's going to be offended if you get up and need to grab more coffee or, I've said this after I'm done talking, so they won't be offended if you go grab coffee or use the restroom or whatever. Give it a couple minutes here.
He's on there. Yeah, that's very important. Okay. Well, you know, nuclear work. Right.
And it's
Yeah.
on the.
Here, I'll write it down.
It's on the, which, my iPad finds two different.
It should be.
Is it two words like that? No.
Here today, this morning, to begin the discussion on perspectives from past public lands legislative efforts. There's a lot of interesting perspectives here, folks who have worked on these projects, either at the federal level, the local level, or as an NGO. What's worked, what hasn't worked, lessons that we can learn. And so I'm going to start with Travis McNiven. You heard him introduce himself before. Travis was born and raised in western Wyoming, right here around the Lander area, working in the family business of ranch management consulting, production agriculture, and outfitting. And he applies his knowledge, which is considerable, of agriculture and natural resource policy by working for U.S. Senator John Barrasso as a state natural resources advisor. The distinct pleasure of working with Travis. As you know, the delegation works pretty well together, and those of us who did agriculture and natural resource policy in DC, there's usually 3 or 4 of us work very closely together. I have the distinct pleasure of working with Travis a lot. And Wyoming is very lucky that, and I think Senator Barrasso had a lot of vision and foresight for transferring Travis from his DC spot back here. Now he works out of Rock Springs and is a natural resource advisor here in the state for the senator. Which is a unique thing. I'm not sure the delegation has done anything like that, at least in recent memory. But it's a real benefit, particularly to southwest Wyoming, but Wyoming as a whole, to have Travis here. So I'm going to let Travis start. Go ahead, Mr. McNiven.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and it's such a great group of people. I think back on my 5+ years being in DC, and I think I've had the opportunity to meet with or visit at some point or another with the majority of the people in the room, and so it's a distinguished gathering. Pete has laid out about 5 to 8 minutes for each of us to hit on some points and then have questions later. So if I do hit on a point that you have a question on or want to follow up with, there will definitely be time for that. And so I won't spend a whole lot of time on each of the points that I kind of wanted to address. So I have about half dozen or 8 or so here. And the first one is that one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what is the role of the delegation in this? And the simple answer to that is one of support. This is a locally driven process, and the outcome is whatever the outcome is that is developed on the ground. There's no desire or effort to tip the scales or put a thumb on the scale from Senator Brasso's office or the delegation. And when there is a product that is supported across the spectrum, we will work to pass that. And so we're here in a supportive role, and you all are in the driver's seat. Another point that I kind of would make as I've watched numerous bills and efforts from the entire Congress, and I'll kind of echo one of the things that Pete said earlier, and that's to be realistic and have some realism. Every bill that I've ever seen pass, I didn't come across the constituency group that came into the office and said, when this bill's before the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, we are thrilled. We got everything that we wanted, and it passed. I've really never come across that. The situation is usually collective groups come in across the board, and they say, we hashed it out, and we're all supportive of this product. Recognizing we didn't get everything. So I think that, there's a certain amount of realism, and as Pete said, this process or a piece of legislation like this, when they're introduced, isn't the place to overturn or change or modify national policies. I think that's an important thing to do or to recognize. Another point is the importance of creativity in these things. You have the bookends of designations and hard releases, but there's an awful lot of middle ground, and Pete mentioned that, but I reiterate, there is a lot of middle ground, and I've seen a lot of creative ideas in past pieces of legislation that groups have put together. And I will give just one example of what could be many. I'm familiar with a place that the majority of folks in the local area wanted a particular piece of wilderness, but there were a couple of roads that went through it and were very popular roads and hunting access and these sorts of things to get to some trailheads and some turnouts and these sorts of things. So there's a lot of discussion, and to skip to the end, what they did was they drew the boundary of the wilderness within, I think it was 10 or 15 feet of the road on either side. And so the roads could be used as is, and then once you parked and got on your horse or hiked, then you were off. And so there are, it doesn't have to be all or nothing in all situations. So there's a lot of middle ground and creative ideas to be had in something like this. Process is important is another point. As a delegation, when we're looking to advance a piece of legislation, we have to point to 2 things and share that with the staff from other senators or colleagues that Senator Brasso has when he's talking to them, and we're talking to at the staff level. And that's where you're, of course, pointing to the product that's in black and white, but also in the process that got it there. It helps the bill to pass when you can go to other members of Congress and their staff and say, here's the process that it went through. Here's how people were able to be transparent. Here's how people were able to have a voice in the process. And then people talk, there's internet, there's email, there's phone calls, and, and I, as a staffer in other instances, have picked up the phone and called groups in states and said, they're telling me that you were part of this process. Is that accurate? And they said, yes, and sometimes they said no, and gave me, their view of it. But process is important because it gets checked on. It's not just something that needs to be said was that, and because it gets followed up, and that's part of helping whatever comes up get passed. I definitely think that there's a window of opportunity. Obviously, getting a bill ready to be introduced and then getting a bill passed are two different things. And right now, as a whole, the Wyoming delegation has some good seniority and has some good committee positions that would be very helpful in getting a bill passed. And in politics and in policy, things aren't permanent, and so those windows of opportunity won't necessarily always be there. Another point that I would briefly touch upon is the importance of when there's unity or when there's agreement, even if there's take and give, but when there's something arrived at, the importance of all of the parties backing the Wyoming plan, the Wyoming solution, the Wyoming whatever is created. Because that's very important. Because what it does when you're in Congress is it minimizes the impact of outside groups. Because there's always going to be someone lobbying Congress of why this bill or this particular agreement or solution isn't enough to their liking. There will be plenty of outside groups that it's not pure enough or doesn't go far enough, and they will lobby from outside the state. And it's important for those who work on it to back their product at the end of the day. And then one thing that I observed is there's going back to there's a lot of creativity and a lot of flexibility and Pete asked a really good question, what is wanted? Because when you are crafting your proposals and your solutions, it is a very active role. You can draw boundaries to roads. You can grandfather in existing uses. You can do a lot of things to get to a potential yes as a collective group of stakeholders. And so not there can definitely be some thinking outside the box. And then Pete answered the question about deference, and that definitely happens to an extent in the Senate, and there's lots and lots of federal lands type bills that when a delegation comes forward, they advocate for and pass, and I can think of a number of states. The Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act, is a good example of something that was very Nevada centric, Nevada driven. Nevada very much benefited. They were, and public lands, many of them were disposed of, transferred, sold, realigned. But that was a very driven sort of Nevada thing. Bills in Oregon and other land exchanges and designations, river designations, happens all over the place. And the question always is, it can be driven by a delegation, but the question's always asked, was everybody at the table? and that comes back to that process, and is that supported, and that's why that's so important. So I believe we got 8 minutes. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Pete, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. I'm going to go ahead and introduce, we'll go down and do all 4 of you here, and then we'll take questions after that. Thanks, Travis, for those insights. Appreciate that a lot. Second, we're going to go to Paul Spittler. Paul is a director of the wilderness campaigns for the Wilderness Society, and we too share some history of policy history going back to trying to get the federal government to study and pay a little bit more attention to the status of Forest Service trails and taking care of trails so that folks can actually access our beautiful forests. He spent the past 2 decades working for the Conservation of Public Land. Paul has served as Second Director for the California Wilderness Coalition, Program Officer for Resources Law Group, and as Chairman of the State of California Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Commission. He's been involved in federal land use legislation across the West and lives in Bozeman, Montana. Won't hold against him. Paul, thank you very much for coming here. Really appreciate it. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I appreciate the invite. Travis often gives me a hard time because my organization picks on his boss a lot because we don't see eye to eye on many things. So I just want to say, for the record, in front of a room full of people, the Wilderness Society agrees entirely with Senator Barrasso on this issue. So appreciate the comments, and I think they were spot on. As Pete mentioned, I've been working on public lands issues for a couple decades and have been involved in numerous comprehensive public lands bills. And the Wilderness Society is a strong supporter of these bills. We engage in these efforts across the West, and we do so because we find them to be the best way to advance our interests in conservation by working with local communities. There are a lot of successful examples of comprehensive public lands legislation. Unfortunately, I have an hour presentation planned, and I'd love to talk about some of those, but I'm just trying to squeeze this down to 5 to 8 minutes. So I'm going to have to cut things out. So I won't be able to talk about each of these efforts. I will say I have a paper that describes them all. If anyone is interested in it, let me know, and I'm happy to get you a copy. Each of these efforts has their own story. They came to be in different ways. They contain different elements. But there's a lot of commonalities. In the Owyhee Canyon country in southern Idaho, ranchers and conservationists sat down and said, we're not happy with the status quo. We think we can do things better if we come up with our own proposal to improve conservation and improve ranching practices. In Lyon County, Nevada, local community interests were interested in expanding a copper mine. Conservation interests there were interested in protecting some land's wilderness, and they found a way to work together. In the eastern Sierra of Mono County, snowmobile interests wanted access to more land, and conservation groups wanted more land protected, including some of the oldest trees on Earth. They found a way to develop a proposal that they could all support. So the story on these successful efforts is different, but there is a lot of commonalities. And I'd like to talk about a few of those because I think they're very instructive for what happens here in Wyoming. One of the commonalities is that these efforts are all place-based, they're locally crafted, and they're developed in a very limited geography. Congress has not passed statewide public lands legislation in decades, and I think it could well be decades before they do it again. All of these bills cover either one county or one particular geography. And, you know, there's a good reason for that. It's because these bills are difficult to create, and they're complicated, and they're time-consuming to put together, and there's a lot of stakeholders interested. And it's simply not feasible in many cases to do that on a grand scale. Another common feature of some of these bills, or of all of these bills, I will say, is that they have broad stakeholder support. You might have noticed we have a divided Congress now. And For legislation to pass Congress, there needs to be support on both sides of the aisle. And that doesn't mean you need to make everybody happy. As Travis mentioned, there will always be people who oppose these efforts. I think each of the successful public lands bills that I mentioned had opposition on both sides of the aisle. Some thought they didn't go far enough for their interests, some thought they went too far. But you need to have enough people in the middle who are supportive. It comes down to, as one member of Congress said in describing his proposal to a county commission, do you want the bill you want, or do you want the bill you can get? And there's a difference there. Another common element of these bills is that they avoid poison pills, hot button issues. There are political ground rules to passing public lands legislation in DC. They're not written down anywhere, but those of us who have spent enough time in DC know what they are. Issues like hard release or Antiquities Act exemptions. These are issues that Congress has not grappled with in decades, and in my opinion is not likely to, particularly in a divided Congress. And the successful bills negotiate finding common ground while finding a way to avoid these hot button issues. All these bills also share a commitment to win-win. And I know win-win is kind of a cliche, but by win-win I mean all the stakeholders get some of what they want, and they come out ahead versus the status quo. If you're coming into this process with an idealized version of what the outcome is going to be, you're bound to be disappointed. If you come into this process saying, let me look at where I am under the status quo and whether or not I could do better through this process, you're much more likely to be successful. And at the end of the day, every group will, of course, have to make its determination on whether or not they're better off supporting a proposal or better off opposing it and trying to stick with the status quo. As one Senate staffer has told me, who's done a lot of these bills, everyone gets some of what they want, everyone gets some of what they don't want. That's how the bills work. Finally, I guess one last thing I'll say, and this really is directed primarily to the county commissioners in the room, although it applies to everyone. You have to want it. You have to really want this bill for it to pass, because you will likely face opposition from all sorts of people, including people who you might agree with on a lot of things. You will likely be attacked by friends and enemies. You might even have people run against you. So you have to want it. You'll have to defend your process and your outcome over and over again. And it's not easy. But the results can be great. They can be good for the land. They can be good for the communities. And I will also say that, to disagree with Pete, my experience is that in these processes, success begets success. In Nevada, for example, Nevada first passed comprehensive public lands legislation in one county in the year 2000. After that, counties in Nevada lined up and said, we want to do this too. So they passed another comprehensive countywide lands bill in 2002. Then they passed another one in 2004. Then they passed another one in 2006. They passed two more in 2014. There's three more that are currently in the works today. In Utah, a comprehensive public lands countywide bill was passed in 2009. After that, numerous Utah counties stepped forward and said, we want to do this in our counties too, which ultimately led to the Public Lands Initiative, which is being proposed today. So if you go through the process right and you do it well, the outcome can be great, and other counties will want to do it. So I don't think that you just have one bite of the apple. Gregory asked me to say a few words about the Utah process. Some of you might have followed that process from afar. Some might have been involved in it. My organization was pretty intimately involved in Utah. We spent a lot of time over the last 5 years or so working with county commissioners and other stakeholders, and ultimately leading up to the release of draft legislation last week. And in our opinion, the draft legislation is not something we can support, which I know is a disappointment to many, and it's certainly a disappointment to us after years of engaging in Utah. And I think there was a few problems there that I'd like to mention, and these are probably worth mentioning both for people interested in Utah and also as you enter a process here in Wyoming that's similar to what's going on in Utah. One of the problems I think that is facing Utah is the effort there was simply too big, covered the entire eastern half of the state. Several individual counties had 3 times as many wilderness caliber lands as the entire state of Wyoming. So it was just a massive scale, and the suite of issues there was very difficult to tackle in one proposal. I think at times Utah suffered from a lack of leadership. I mentioned one of the common elements of these public lands bills is strong, pragmatic congressional leadership. Every single public lands bill that has passed Congress has had a congressional champion that has both championed the bill before it was introduced and after it was introduced. And that means someone has to be at the helm who can say, here's what's doable, here's what's not, and can work to bring people together and shepherd the bill through the development and process in through passing. And that wasn't always there in Utah. We needed that at key times. These last two were, I think, really big pitfalls in Utah. Several of the counties, Utah was kind of made up of 7 or 8 counties that developed their own processes with kind of very little guidance from the congressional delegation or the governor's office on how to develop their proposal. So several of the counties said, well, we're going to develop a local stakeholder group, but we're going to exclude key stakeholders, including my organization. Some of the counties said, we don't want to work with some of those wilderness or those conservation groups. Well, at the end of the day, that's a pretty flawed process. You can't succeed while excluding key stakeholders from the process. And that led to a flawed outcome. And then the final challenge in Utah is that at the end of the day, the proposal that the congressional delegation unveiled last week didn't reflect the places where stakeholders agreed. We found a tremendous amount of common ground in Utah, working with county commissioners, ranchers, off-road vehicle interests, and others. A lot of areas that we agreed to. And in some counties, we actually struck agreements. We said, all right, here's where we agree. Well, the bill that was introduced last week doesn't even reflect those agreements. It goes far beyond them. And it includes elements that many stakeholders have said from the get-go, we'll never support. So those are some caveats, and then I think fits well with what I said earlier about some of the common elements of these successful efforts, and also some things to avoid. At the end of the day, my experience is that success or failure in these efforts can often be a pretty fine line, and it often comes down to people. And it comes down to people willing and able to work together and willing to find solutions that work for everyone. And I'm a strong believer in this process. My organization is committed to it, and we will do everything we can to see that it works here in Wyoming. And I think there's a lot of possibilities here. So again, appreciate the invitation, and thank you for hearing me out.
Thanks very much, Paul. Appreciate your remarks. We can talk later about the role of Harry Reid in the success of heated Nevada bills. Next, I want to introduce Brett Swift, who is an officer for the Pew Charitable Trust America's Wilderness Program. Brett is based out of Portland, Oregon, and has the distinction of following our instructions and writing a 2-sentence introduction. I appreciate that, Brett. The floor is yours.
First of all, thanks everybody. This is a real pleasure to be here to talk about some of these, past successful efforts. As Pete mentioned, I'm with the Pew Charitable Trusts in their Public Lands Department. We are formerly known as the Campaign for America's Wilderness. So we're a nonprofit that works on land protection throughout the West. So I am able to work on campaigns in a number of different states. And the Pew team has been involved in many of the campaigns that Paul highlighted, a bunch of those successful efforts. And we are involved in really kind of different ways. My colleagues spent many hours on the ground in Utah, in the Utah Public Lands Initiative. We also work a lot in the DC arena as well. And so there's really no single way to embark on something like this. I think Paul highlighted a number of elements that can help lead to success. I want to echo those. I think from our experience, we have a lot of the same kind of elements that we would support. And while we are involved on the ground in many efforts, as I mentioned, we're also very active in DC, working to get legislation passed. So I kind of want to focus on that perspective. I do think it is important to keep that perspective in mind to ensure that all the incredible work that is done on the ground in all the different counties actually comes to fruition. As Travis mentioned, it's one thing to get a bill introduced, it's another to get it passed. And I think having a strong congressional leader, it's fantastic that actually several offices are here today. I think that is a critical piece of it. As Paul mentioned, I think it is helpful to kind of help define what is and what is not possible in legislation and really work to build support in Congress. Again, being cognizant of what is and what is not possible in DC, it is really important to have a kind of a balanced, realistic approach or proposal that has a chance of getting through. And I think critical to that, to kind of reiterate something that Paul said, is avoiding poison pills. It is important that it is Wyoming specific, and I appreciate the comments about not tackling national policy issues, because I think that can really adversely affect the chances that something would get through Congress. And there is deference, there absolutely is deference to the locally led decisions, and I think that the big caveat that you said, that are reasonable. So I think keeping that kind of perspective in mind is really critical. I think one way to ensure that is to make sure that kind of local, state, national voices are a factor in the different county efforts. That they're involved in the development of the proposal. I think that can also be incredibly helpful when the proposals get to DC. Having those kind of the national voices are key to advancing things, can work very closely with the offices, make sure that the intent stays there from an agreement that's reached to drafting legislation and working to get it passed. So again, I just want to kind of highlight that. In closing, I just would say that it's a really exciting opportunity here in Wyoming. Pew is very supportive of it, and we found that a colleague told me that the first few meetings are always the hardest, the most challenging, but really sitting down, getting out in the field, and working hard to understand what everyone's interests are here is where the work that has to get done. I mean, that is the heavy lifting that has to happen here. So just want to say that I think it's incredibly exciting, everybody who's here and interested in exploring.
Thanks very much, Brett. Appreciate that. Appreciate you being here. Finally, very pleased to introduce Mark Ward. Mark has served as a Senior Policy Analyst and Public Lands Counsel of the Utah Association of Counties since joining, you guys call yourselves UAC? UAC, that's nice, like that. Joining UAC in 2006. He graduated in 1984 from BYU Law School. Prior to UAC, Ward worked 7 years in private law practice and 15 years in the Utah Attorney General's Office Litigation Division. and RS 2477 public land sections. There's some fun stuff. He and his wife Amy have 8 children and 11 grandchildren, reside in Southwest Salt Lake Valley. Mark, thanks so much for making the drive over here, and I look forward to your comments. You have the floor.
Thank you. That's an old resume. I now have 15 grandchildren, so I just keep coming. Like Joe Friday said on Dragnet, just the facts, man, just the facts. Here's some of the wants that that are important to counties that are in the discussion draft. And it is a discussion draft, which means it's not introduced, which means it's malleable and subject to change. And the delegation thought there was value in just getting something on paper. And the discussion continues after 3 years, 1,200 meetings, and 65 detailed proposals. We now have a discussion draft. We have a 110,000 acre motorized snowmobile recreation area for the high UNs. I'm just listing some of the wants that are important to the counties in the draft. We have significant exchanges and blocking up of school trust land in Carbon, Uinta, and Grand, and San Juan counties. Very significant, really unprecedented, where you take scattered sections and block them together and in mineral-rich, energy-rich areas. We have a 10,000 acre expansion of a state park, Baldwin Valley. We have the creation of a 13,000 acre state forest in northeastern Utah. We have various small-scale land exchanges that will facilitate development in various parts of the state. We have 21 conveyances of land for various uses such as airport expansion, sheriff substations, etc., totaling 40,000 acres. We have in Grand County 8 recreation zones that the county really wanted there, nearly half million acres for that. We have, as yet unspecified in the discussion draft, but carve out for mineral transfer for the Navajo Nation in southeast Utah, some other unspecified economic development features for the Ute tribe in northeastern Utah. Significantly, the bill also protects the designation there were 6 2008 BLM RMPs that designated certain lands to be open for oil and gas leasing. Since then, the BLM has systematically dishonored and ignored that RMP and nipped away at the edges with various programs such as master leasing and so forth. I don't know if master leasing afflicts Wyoming or not, but master leasing program. The bill would hardwire the 2008 RMPs in terms of the oil and gas lands that they guarantee to be open, and particularly in the Uinta Basin. So it's an accomplishment that really can only be done with legislation, as opposed to wrangling with the BLM and trying to get them to follow their RMPs after spending 10 years to get those RMPs hammered out. So that's a nice want for the county, very significant. The bill also would provide perpetuity right-of-ways for county Class B, Class D roads, except for roads that cross into wilderness areas or forest lands or national park lands in the 7 counties who are participating. And I should say this is not a statewide bill. It's 7 counties. Some more counties than 7 wanted to participate. The delegation said no, let's keep it to 7. See how this goes. And so, it's not a statewide bill. What's the cost for these wants? And what are the counties willing to give up for this? They're willing to give up the designation of 2.2 million acres, 40 areas designated as wilderness areas. Hard W, 2.2 million Another 11 areas designated as national conservation areas, totaling nearly 700,000 acres. Additional special management areas, which time doesn't allow me to go into the details on those. That's another nearly 90,000 acres. The recreation of a small 800-acre national monument, it's called the Jurassic National Monument for paleontological resources. It would expand Arches National Park by nearly 20,000 acres. It would create wild and scenic river designations on the Colorado River, 7 segments totaling 77 miles. The Dolores River coming out of Colorado, 3 segments, 22 miles. 5 segments on the Green River totaling 148 miles. Dark Canyon River, 1 segment, 6 miles. San Juan River, 1 segment, 17 miles. Those are basically the give-ups. That's the way to look at it. The way the counties have looked at this. You know, they didn't wake up one day and say, hey, let's do wilderness out of the goodness of our heart. Same thing on the other side. Very simple, it's not rocket science. The wants, the accomplishments that I listed at the beginning are things that can only be obtained legislatively. And they're willing to pay that cost. They've only paid $2.2 million in wilderness, 700,000 in NCAs and the other Wild and Snake River and so forth. Importantly, however, the discussion draft at the request of the counties and the stakeholders, the grazing stakeholders and other stakeholders are interested in forest health and in vegetative health. Even in the 40 areas that are designated as wilderness, the 2.2 million, there are certain protections and certain guarantees that the discussion draft puts into the language. For example, it guarantees that necessary measures to manage and treat fire, insects, and disease will not be prejudiced, will not be impinged by virtue of the wilderness designation. It guarantees that wildfire management operations, including aircraft and mechanized equipment, can also be used in wilderness areas. It protects livestock at the stocking levels that exists as of January 1, 2016 in those areas, in those wilderness areas. It relieves those areas of the planned animal viability requirements of Title 36, Section 219 for forest lands, making it easier to carry out grazing activities and wildlife and plant restoration activities. It guarantees the authority of the State Fish and Wildlife Division and Wildlife Board with respect to fish and wildlife in those wilderness areas. It protects water development projects that are existing within those areas and allows for continued use of mechanized equipment and whatever is necessary to keep those water projects viable. It mandates respect for state water law and for hands off of the existing water infrastructure. It allows for military overflights. It says no to so-called buffer zone management. I don't know how many of you know what buffer zone management is. Sort of a de facto standard that many field offices and forests apply. They say, well, yeah, we realize that the wilderness area only goes to these boundaries, but gee, we got to have, we have to kind of lighten up on the buffer zones around that so that certain sights and sounds and smells cannot be experienced inside those areas. There's reasonable relief provided for that. On the NSAs, or the NCAs, excuse me, National Conservation Areas, the draft requires that it gives the managing authority, be it BLM or Forest Service, depending on the area designated. It says they have to come up with a management plan within 2 years of the bill's enactment. It encourages the forest and BLM to respect land management plans of, land management plans of state and local governments for those as far as input into the management plans for those NCAs, and provides that if the secretary involved in agriculture or interior does not incorporate the proposed state and local plans for managing those NCAs, then the secretary has to explain in writing to the House Committee on Natural Resources why they have not incorporated those plans. So it's not an absolute requirement, but it's a strong encouragement that the respective secretary pay attention to state and local input for managing those NCAs. In the NCAs provide similar protection that I outlined for wilderness areas with respect to livestock, wildfire management, etc. So that's a basic overview of where that is, and I'm not here to try to influence what you do. Utah is a very strong ethic in Utah concerning states' rights and local control and rights. So because of that, I'm just here to report the what, tell you where it is right now. It's, we're far from crossing the finish line. Can't begin to describe for you the amount of effort that's taken place. I was shocked when I got that letter from a delegation member saying that they've tallied up 1,200 separate meetings, stakeholder meetings, and so forth in various counties. This discussion draft is basically currently to the liking of the counties. So that's all I really have to say on the what. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Let's give a hand to the panel real quick. We've got a few minutes for questions. I want to open it up. Mark, with you, thanks for that. I want to go back to something that you said and something that Paul said with respect to the political reality. You mentioned the things you got from the draft and the cost for those things. Can you talk for a moment about that political reality from a commissioner standpoint in Utah? What do they have to face? What do they tell their constituents when you're talking about wilderness with a capital W? And let me just set the stage. I talked to a commissioner earlier this morning. I won't say who it was or for what county, but it said that fielded calls. Oh, that's funny. New Year whoopee. That's funny. Thanks, Kelly. That's the wireless password, everybody. I was talking to a commissioner this morning who said fielded calls all day yesterday from people who heard he was coming to this meeting, very worried. Don't do this, don't listen, don't be a part of this, that kind of thing. So how have the commissioners in Utah dealt with that from a political standpoint?
Well, they have to approach it the same way I did in the order that I described the bill. They would be walking into a propeller just to say, hey, let's have a talk about wilderness in the raw abstract. None of them would dare do that. Except maybe in Grant County, they might. But the other counties, they have to start with talking to the grazers, talking to the oil and gas community about the problems they have with livestock levels being chipped away, oil and gas leases and seasonal restrictions being ever tightened. And they have to begin the conversation by saying, hey, you want some legislative help there? You want to shore up those grazing levels? You want to shore up that, this and that? You want some conveyances? You need an airport expansion? And then the conversation goes forward and the commissioners say, well, we can't get this done without legislation. And then the conversation goes, and we can't just get this in the abstract. We got to give something. And that's when they start to talk about the W word or the NCA word. And that's kind of how it goes. Politically, that's the only way it's been able to go. There are 2 commissioners that have been voted out of office because of their support for PLI. And so it's a reality, but others are being hailed. So it's different. And I'm realizing my answer, I'm kind of putting together, the experiences of 7 counties. So that's generally how you navigate the politics.
Thanks, Mark. Open up to questions, folks from the audience. Joel.
Thanks, Pete. Question.
You're with again.
Oh, Joel Bowden, Southern County Commission. Start with Travis, but anybody else on the panel. Do you foresee a way, and I've had the question asked to me already in discussion of potentially our county participating in this. The question was, to the extent of, would there be a way through this process to provide some assurance that if we go through this on BLM and forest, is there a way to include in that language what we in Wyoming perceive as a really serious threat from future endangered species, even the existing sage grouse, for example, that's threatening the entire economy of our whole state? Is there a way to write language into this kind of a act that would address some of those issues, or would that be is that so far off to the side that it's not doable?
I'm glad we start with easy stuff. So I would actually have two thoughts on that, Joel. One is that I will use I'll use Pete's example of the coal leasing earlier. If the language says we're, you know, or I'll use an outlandish example, you know, sage grouse are forever hereby deemed never endangered in the state of Wyoming. Something outlandish like that. And that's a national policy. You know, it's not, then no. You know, it would just, you know, go nowhere because it become a national policy, ESA sort of thing. As opposed to something more surgical or something more site-specific that was mentioned on the panel here today, to say, you know, some geographical area includes certain protections or recognitions, or you know, we recognize this, and then that goes to the process that we spoke about that can be, you know, the middle or as large a group of the middle that can support, you know, whatever that language would be. And so if you tackle it as a site-specific situation, then I would say maybe. But if it's a national policy sort of, you know, broad stroke, it'd be very, very difficult to ever, you know, pass. The other half of that answer, I think, would be you can write whatever you want in statute, in a bill, you know, in getting something in. You can write whatever you want. That's part of the proactive nature of this is what do you want? Then the second half of that is, of course, what you write needs to have as broad of support as possible if it's going to be, you know, passed. And so there's sideboards upon what you can write. But can you write something creative that, you know, deals with you know, a particular thing at a particular site within the Wyoming plan, you know, or that particular county plan that has broad support? Then I would definitely think that could be explored. How many caveats are in that? I'm not sure, but if there's anybody else has thoughts on that, feel free. Or other questions.
That, a lot of commissioners in Utah asked that same question, and, you know, the feedback from our delegation was that just endangered species are just too hot to handle in this legislation. We have to look for other ways. Whether that's the prescription for Wyoming or not, I don't know. But that was just the feedback we had from our delegation.
Doug Thompson, Fremont County. This is for Paul and Brett. You're from Oregon and Montana, outside the state. And if Wyoming's initiative goes forward, you're going to be lobbied by people from outside the state and inside the state who want you to use your evident influence to kill the thing. What type of communication will you have back to your constituencies within Wyoming and represented on advisory committees to maybe ground truth those efforts to get you to weigh in on one side or the other?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the successful examples that I've picked up at the beginning here, Milwaukee, Canyons in Idaho, all of the various Nevada proposals, Washington County in Utah, the Eastern Sierra proposal. The Wilderness Society supported all of those efforts, and we lobbied members of Congress to support them. We encouraged our nationwide membership to contact their senators and representatives to support those efforts. So if we support an effort, you'll have our full backing.
And if I'm understanding, I mean, I think I agree with Paul on that one. I think that it's incredibly important to really understand and keep the lines of communication, understand all the effort that is going into the county, processes, working. I mean, we support the locally driven efforts. If there's appropriate balance in the committees and diverse stakeholders are being heard. So we think it's really, critical to respect that, to understand what's happened, to keep those lines of communication before doing anything. But as Paul said, we've supported the bulk of the efforts that have kind of met that and then had the appropriate balance for conservation.
Rob Davidson with the Council for the Bighorn Range. My question is for Mr. McNiven. With the exception of the 2009 omnibus bill that included the Wyoming Legacy Act and possibly the White Cloud Act was in Idaho, has Senator Barrasso ever supported, actually voted for, a collaborative bill in conservation?
I would just need to go back and look at the records. I don't have which ones offhand.
But you have no indirect knowledge. He got it behind this bill in Idaho or Montana, Nevada.
Well, there's actually a number of bills in committee that there's a lot of votes. I mean, like the Montana, the Front Range, they had their Front Range bill. Senator Boxes, Mac Boxes had that. They were in support of that. There's a lot of individual bills that have votes in the ENR committee, during the business meetings that get voted out. And then as you recognize and pointed out, a lot of public lands bills get wrapped into larger packages on the Senate floor. And so there's not an extensive list of Senate floor up and down votes on individual site specific sort of things. And then a lot of public lands bills that he has supportive of different natures go by UC. They go by unanimous consent off the Senate floor as well. And so there's a lot more activity and a lot more of those sorts of things than single, the Senate floor. And so there'd be an extensive list of things at the committee level. And then there's an awful lot of those bills that are supportive that go by UC in small public lands packages of maybe 2, 4, or 6 bills that get UC'd off the Senate floor.
Mr. Ward, Paul Vogelheim from Teton County. You kind of gave us a reality check in terms of the 1,200 meetings, the 65 drafts, pretty staggering. Could you speak to a little bit about the tenacity in the leadership to kind of see that through? And is it worth it?
Well, appreciate that question. Someone here today mentioned that the county commissioners have to want it. I can't remember who said that, and they have to want it. And then you need good delegation staff. At least in Utah, the model was that delegation staffers, were there side by side with the commissioners and the other stakeholders, kind of making sure these meetings happen. But the carrot, there has to be a carrot out there that you want. I need this carrot. Otherwise, the effort to have those many meetings can only be driven by the carrot. And the carrot is the stuff I opened with. All the things that, those are good things for Utah. They're great things for Utah. And they're wonderful things I submit. Not everybody would agree with me, but, there's a lot, commissioners care about true conservation values, beautification of the forest, of the landscape, of the watershed. And there's some nice things in here that facilitate that. And so there has to be a passion for the stuff you want, not just a, oh gee, it's time to do some wilderness. That's all I can really say to you about what's driven those 1,200 meetings. Now, of course, 1,200 meetings, that's every little time a stakeholder group gets together, and times 7 counties. Okay, so I hope that doesn't stagger you too much, but I mean, it's been a lot of hard work.
Last question here, Wally, go ahead.
Wally Johnson, Florida County. Paul, I really appreciate your comments there, because that's where we started 5 years ago. We were going to do it on a county basis. And then the governor suggested it would be better to approach it on a statewide basis. So I appreciate your comments there. Mr. Ward, you made a comment about the trees, removing the trees out of the wilderness. One of the things that we've always said is that we should remove those beetle-killed trees out of the forest before they burn. When you're making your comment, were there agreements to take those trees out of the wilderness prior to the fire starting? Because obviously that causes regional haze, which we fought in Wyoming, especially in southwestern Wyoming. And then the other one I'd ask you to comment on is the Rock Springs RMP is in play right now for revision, and I don't know which one's going to come first, RMP or this initiative. So what kind of language, if assuming that the RMP gets settled before this issue, what kind of language would you suggest that you need to put into that RMP to address this issue?
Are you still in the cooperating agency phase of that RMP, or is there a public draft out here?
No, cooperating agency.
So it's kind of hard for me to, of course, I'm a member of the public too.
Just tell me what you did.
Yeah, I just think that if you pre-public draft release, your cooperating agency wants to try and if you see a bill like this on the horizon, I think you want to get as much of it as you can. Now, you may not be able to get it all, but if there's an opening, get as much as you can in the RMP. Your first question about treatment of silviculture treatments of trees and so forth. Sorry if I glossed over this. I need to specify and clarify one thing. In the 40 wilderness areas, the discussion draft currently says you can do mechanized activities and aerial activities in the name of fighting fire. But it doesn't provide for a pre-fire silvicultural removal. But in the NCAs it does. So remember, we have 2.2 million acres of wilderness, 700,000 acres. In the NCAs, that's one of the differences between NCA management and wilderness management. The discussion draft does provide for the thinning of trees. But the other part of your question, is there removal of trees currently under the wilderness regime? No, at least not in Utah. I once had, nor for WSAs. I once had a now former BLM field office manager, whose name I won't mention to protect him and his family, but he once said, we're standing in front of we had a vantage of the Henry Mountains, where we could see part of the mountains were WSA and part of it were not. He said, see that unhealthy part there? See that healthy part over there? See the line between the middle? That's the WSA boundary. You know, and so the unhealthy part obviously was the WSA. So, you know, those kinds of things, there's, you know, things counties asked for in the NCAs that couldn't get it in the wilderness areas. So, but maybe you can here in Wyoming. I don't know. It's like Pete stressed over and over. You're building something from scratch. You know, where you guys can work out.
I'd like to just make one quick addition to that. You know, I think from the perspective of the Wilderness Society, I mean, we agree that there's a lot of forest issues that need to be addressed, you know, beetle kill and fire and so on, forest restoration. That being said, if an area is going to be designated as wilderness, it's very important to us that it be managed as a wilderness. And that does not mean it's wilderness, but we're going to allow this activity, that activity that's not allowed in wilderness areas. It's going to be wilderness, it needs to be wilderness in accordance with the Wilderness Act. If there's areas that need treatment and forestry and so on, then, you know, perhaps wilderness isn't the appropriate designation for those places.
All right, well, thank you very much for that discussion. Let's take a break, guys, get a stretch, have some coffee, and I think there's some coffee cake back there. We'll reconvene in a few minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, my name is Steve Smutko. I'm a Spicer Chair in Collaborative Practice at the University of Wyoming in the House School of Environment and Natural Resources and the Department of Agricultural and Applied Economics. In introducing this panel, one of the things that I think that we all have to try to understand here is how important this idea of who sits at the table is in these types of processes. So issues of representation really get to the heart of process integrity and legitimacy. And it's not an easy thing. The idea of, are we going to really invite that person to sit at the table with us and work through these issues? Can we really do that? These are the kinds of things that we all have to think about and to try to make these processes work. So Travis McNiven had said, the process is important. Doug Spittler said, we can't exclude key stakeholders. So, these things are pervasive in these sorts of processes that we're discussing. So to hash this out, we have 4 esteemed panelists, and I will introduce them one at a time. So we'll go in the same direction as we did at the last panel. So to kick it off for us will be Dan Smitherman. Dan currently serves as the Wyoming representative for the Wyoming Wilderness Society in the Northern Rockies region. And previous to this assignment, he was with the Citizens for the Wyoming Range as an outreach coordinator. Dan also was a member of Citizens Protecting the Wyoming Range and worked on the campaign that successfully passed the Wyoming Range Legacy Act. Dan has also worked extensively with the Rocky Mountain Owl Foundation and as a committee chairman and state PAC board member. So Dan.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Pete, for inviting me. To me, just to start this off, I don't think I ever thought I would see this diverse people in the same room speaking to each other, no blood and joy. So this is a great day if we do nothing else other than we're sitting here together. Since I'm the Wyoming representative, a lot of this work will fall on my shoulders, and I want to reiterate what Paul said, in the Wilderness Society supports this 100%, and not only supports it, but we're excited about it. I don't have all the answers for how to form these committees, or how to make them inclusive, but I do have 5 or 6 points I'd like to make. And the first one, when you talk about being inclusive, you can't assume that one rep from one NGO represents all the interests. So just because you have one rancher or one conservation group or one sportsman group doesn't necessarily mean that they represent all the interests in this landscape. So you have to be really careful to not label the group or catalog the group in that manner. Secondly, you need to make sure that the people you put in these groups have forward and backward communications. They need to be able to communicate to the rest of the collaborative, but they also need to have a method to communicate backwards to the interests in the groups that they allegedly are representing. It's very important when you look at these landscapes that all the interests in those landscapes are represented. And that's difficult, and it can be done in a lot of different ways. In some cases, it's helpful if you sit down with a couple of key stakeholders that you know or in your county or in your area and put together what we call an interest matrix, where you list all the interests that might be part of that landscape, and then identify who might be qualified to represent that interest, and then go out and start doing invitations. And one thing is probably not relevant to this group, but I want to make a point. I use the word interest and not positions. It doesn't do you anything or any advantage to bring someone into a collaborative group that has a position. Another point that's probably somewhat controversial is talking about national interest. I think it's fair to assume that there will be landscapes for which you'll have stakeholders that have an interest in that landscape. They may not physically live in your county or in your area, but that doesn't mean that their interest and their participation is not legitimate. In my opinion, it's not really the process of how you design these as much as the result. The fact that you have a broad-based, inclusive, diverse group of people that are taking a look at this particular landscape. It's also appropriate to involve the stakeholders in this process. That gives extra legitimacy to outside observers, that you've actually put together a group that's not stacked one way or the other. And that's really, you know, I don't have all the answers, but I think it's super important for this particular initiative that these groups be as diverse and represent all the interests as much as possible.
All right, thank you, Dan. Short and sweet, and I think we'll be able to build on that from with our other panelists and then questions from you all. Our next panelist is Jessica Crowder. So Jessica is a policy advisor for the Wyoming Governor Matt Mead, a position she's held for 2 years. Her focus is on natural resources management with an emphasis on federal land management and agriculture. So Jessica works closely with federal partners, state agencies, local governments, and multiple non-governmental organizations and citizens to develop policy and management of natural resources that benefit Wyoming citizens and Wyoming landscapes. So Jessica holds a Master of Science in Range Management from Texas A&M and also a BS in Range Management from the same university, which is okay, a budget back in Wyoming. So Jessica, I've also had an opportunity to work closely with Jessica over the last couple of years on the Forest Task Force here in Wyoming. And Jessica represented her boss quite well. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for the invitation to be here. Just real quick, we can't have this mistake lingering in the room. I went to Texas Tech University.
Oh, did I say
That's okay, no problem. So just a few things. As Steve said, I was a part of the Governor's Task Force on Forests in that process to develop a report and recommendations for the Governor's consideration to basically improve forest health and improve our management of forests and the way we look at forests, and just really try to get an idea of what do people in Wyoming and what do different interests in Wyoming want to see on their forests in Wyoming. And the group was very diverse, a great group. We had some great discussions. We came to conclusions about forests related to forest management or lack of forest management, and what the benefits of all of those different viewpoints are. So if you haven't seen the report and recommendations, it's great. The process was also great and very interesting and pretty new to me. So that's what I want to talk about today a little bit. The governor, of course, supports this process, and I think most of you have heard the governor probably speak to local processes and local interests, and the idea that local people have knowledge. They have an on-the-ground knowledge. They've been in these places, they've seen these places, they've recreated on these places or used these areas in different ways. And so certainly an interest in seeing what local communities, local governments, and local people come up with for management of these landscapes. The other thing I would offer is, and Dan started to talk to a lot of these, so I don't want to be too repetitive, but an inclusion of diverse interests in forming the committee. There's several things that you look for in people that you would like to have sit on these committees and in these groups. And expertise, of course, is something to start with. And Pete addressed and honesty. You need somebody who's honest and forthcoming. You need somebody who can work with their constituents and bring back what their constituents are interested in and have that conversation at the table. You also need someone who has either some level of decision-making authority or an ability to talk to the person who has decision-making authority. You need a person to be able to communicate what decisions are in the different groups that they represent. You also have to have someone who is committed to the process, committed to making progress, and committed to creating something meaningful. And I actually think that's one of the most important pieces of creating these groups. You have to have someone sitting at the table who wants to make a difference and is putting a good, being very forthright, being very honest and open and committed to doing something good. So again, addressing some of the pieces that Pete and Dan have already addressed there. I think those are the key elements to who you want on a stakeholder group like this. The next thing I really want to talk about, and I've seen this in multiple processes I've worked on with Doug, really related to BLM management of BLM lands, processes we saw in the Task Force on Forest, and that's this idea that creating a diverse stakeholder group that can come to some meaningful conclusions is powerful. And what I mean by that is there is really something to be said for a group of people with multiple views about a particular piece of land, whatever that may be, who can come to some kind of agreement. No matter what funding looks like, no matter who leaves positions or comes into positions, no matter how things are changed, when people can agree on how natural resources and landscapes can be managed, even if it's not 100% agreement, that is powerful. That's a good way to get something done. The other part of that is you have an opportunity to build relationships. And that relationship building is another way to make sure that things get done, and it creates a lasting positive impact in the state of Wyoming and really in other areas as well. So I really think that having a diverse stakeholder group is a very, very powerful tool. No matter what your conclusions are, it's going to lead to something positive. And I really do believe that. The last thing I want to say, and this is something that we really pushed on in the Governor's Task Force on Forest discussions is, and one of the reasons why I like this process is it leads to a product. And one of the things that people worry about with collaborative groups is that you sit down and you talk and nothing happens. And so I want to stress that something very positive in this process that's been discussed here today is it does lead to a product, and that is important. So I guess what I want to leave you with is do something with your stakeholder groups. Build those relationships, create a product that you can be proud of, understand that the process takes time, understand that the process is sometimes difficult, and there will be tension and there will be hard conversations, and then understand that implementation of whatever product comes out of this also takes time. But don't get discouraged, build those relationships, create a product you're proud of, and again, with a diverse stakeholder group, there's power behind that. And my hope would be that if you can come to those conclusions with such a diverse stakeholder group, you create really a lasting legacy that even as commissioners come and go, as governors come and go, different executive directors of different groups come and go, whatever the case may be, you've created a legacy of working together, and hopefully it leads to some really good land management decisions as well. So that's what I wanted to put forward and my viewpoint in working in some of these, some areas like this on diverse stakeholder groups. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And I'm sure we'll have some questions about the practicality of all of that and how that might have worked on the Forest Task Force. Our next panelist, Doug Thompson. Doug is chairman of the Fremont County Board of County Commissioners, and he's worked extensively on the greater sage-grouse issue on behalf of Wyoming's local governments, and has served on and chaired myriad public lands-related committees, county, state, and federally commissioned. Now, I will say I've worked with Doug on a number of things, and when we talk about collaboration, county commissioners, somehow Doug's name always rises to the top. So Doug's got quite a bit of experience in working with a variety of different interests and organizations over the years that he's served. Doug.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, this is a participation presentation, so you gotta participate on this. How many of you came today, be honest, to find out what those guys are gonna do to us? Raise your hand. I mean, be honest. Every hand should be up, because we are in a realm where people are doing stuff to us a lot that we, first of all, had no clue was even happening and had no influence in affecting that, and it really affects our life. This is not what that is intended to be. And we're looking at the advisory committee and diversity, and that's kind of what our task today was. But I'll share an example. Myself and a mining representative, and an oil gas representative, and an Audubon Society representative and Wilderness Society representative went back to Washington. And I was sitting right next to the secretary, right here. And I said, you know, you probably don't get this group here very often. She said, no, I don't. It's very pleasant to have that unity. There wasn't any us and them. And I said, well, being presumptuous, of course, I said, well, you know, listen to us, and hopefully this will be replicated in numerous other venues. That's back there. But I think our initiative, the key, and it's been said twice here, is to have an advisory group that is diverse for its perspectives and that does not replicate an us-them process. It can't. If that's where you go or you intend to go, it's not going to work. We have to have diverse interests. Now that's a plus and a minus. Plus is we're hearing a lot of perspectives. A minus is we haven't played well with others in the past, and we're going to have to get over that. Like we tell our kindergartners, let's play well with one another. And I think if this is going to be successful, we're going to have to learn how to play well, respectfully, honestly with others to make this work. In Fremont County, as many of you know, we have, actually it's the only signed RMP in the nation that has sage-grouse conservation measures embedded in it. We got that through, signed, and everybody else, Wally and Aaron, you guys have been battling these things. They got sucked into that money plan thing. But the federal planning process, and this is why I like this, we're going through a congressional route rather than an agency route. In the agencies, as cooperating agencies, the federal planning process is very closed. And there's a benefit to that, but there's also a downside because people end up, what's happening to me? So as we were going through our RMP, there's, as an individual commissioner, and I represented the county at the table, I knew there were groups that either had history with me. I had a ranch, semi-have a ranch now. So I have those connections. I have local government connections. I had some oil and gas connections. But there are some groups out there that, you know, weren't, you know, I didn't have those communication lines with. So through a relationship on the rack, we set up, it's lovingly called our green group here, but we set up a group to talk about what was happening in the RMP from a conservation point. And that proved very beneficial, proved very positive. We are trying and have tried to erase the us, them, and it's we. It's not perfect relationship, but within Fremont County, we have those lines of communication, and I think they're going to have to be replicated in our advisory committee so that people feel like it's a fair process. Now, that being said, I will tell you right now, there will be people who really want to be on that committee that are not going to be on the committee. So it's been mentioned twice here. The people at the table are going to have good lines of communication with their constituencies and bring that back to the table. Now, does that mean those other constituents can't address the advisory committee? Of course they can, because it's an open, transparent process. It'll have to be managed just like we do with our cooperating agency efforts. Also, as we look at local issues, if we have a WSA down by Split Rock, okay, I would anticipate inviting the people who have interest in that. The people that climb rocks. Knowles has a very big operation out there. There's grazers out there. It's got very low potential for oil and gas, but they would be welcome to sit in there. So I anticipate, even though there's an advisory committee, that there will be offshoots and local information gathering as this process moves forward. I think the committee is going to have to be realistic. And we've talked about everything can come on the table, and it is my opinion that if everything remains on the table, you're probably not going to accomplish the job. It will come down to what we feel is most important and most defensible and most reasonable. There are things that will come there that the group isn't going to want to pursue, either philosophically or workload-wise. The more stuff you put, the more effort and the more pressure you can put on the advisory committee. So the size of that committee has got to be something you can work with and that can move. If this was our committee in 3 years, this would still be our committee. So we probably wouldn't have anything come out the other side. And the committee is going to have to be focused on what we want that landscape or that feature to be, and not get hung up on what we're going to call it. Because if we're going to call it something for bean counter purposes, I think you're going to get hung up and not have a successful experience. So it's the management, the desired management of these features, these areas that is going to have to rise to the top within these committees. Aside from that, the one thing I know that counties will be going into is, I have my vision of this. I've been involved probably from when we started talking about it, but each county is going to have to go back to their commission, maybe blueprint out how this will work, and then go forward with the committee selection process. I think we'll probably end up with an application. We'll have appropriate questions, inclusive. You know, I think we want to advertise what's going on and avoid this, oh, you guys are going to turn everything into wilderness, or, oh, you're going to turn this all over to those greedy landowners. I mean, that's going to be out there. The committees will have to deal with that, but I think if it's managed properly, and everybody that has interest in this, which are the citizens of Fremont County and the state of Wyoming, I think we have a great opportunity here, and we need to make the most of it. Thank you, Steve.
All right, thank you, Doug. So now we'll hear from Mark Ward again, from the Utah perspective. Now, I understand that Mark will be leaving us after lunch, so if you would have questions for Mark or want to talk to him, make sure you get with him before he takes off for the afternoon. Hey, Mark.
Thank you. I'll tell you, this whole process is very, very interesting to me. Very, very interesting to be here today. It feels like deja vu all over again in many ways. Just talking about the organization of committees and how the county commissioners have, worked with the various stakeholders. A couple of tools have been very, very useful, I believe. One is the tool of field trips, where you actually go out on the ground, you spend a day or two even, and you go to places that are at issue. And the whole group goes, everybody in that diverse group who are, traditionally opponents of each other, they go out on the ground, and it's amazing how sometimes when you get out on the ground, it just never ceases to amaze me how the ground really speaks the facts. The ground really reduces conflict when everybody's there. I've watched many times that happen. So good liberal use of field trips is recommended and has worked well for the 7 counties who are now players in our bill, our discussion draft. The other is eventually the commissioners are going to have to account to not just the committee, but to the public. And so open houses are useful. And you have to use your own political, put your political fingers to the wind and figure out how often those should happen. There's a fine line between too many and too few. But well-organized public open houses where members of the public get to come and ask every dumb question they want to ask. And you really just take a lot of time hand-holding and explaining and getting feedback. Sometimes it's helpful to have all the stakeholder people who are on your committee there so they can get a reality check as they watch the public respond. Okay, and the public invariably is a diverse group. It's not just the ranchers who show up. It's not just the pro-wilderness people who show up. It's a broad range of people who show up and comment. And it has a way of, just like the land, the way it speaks, the constituents speak too, and it has a way of compressing and narrowing those differences for the committee. Who comprises the committee? First of all, what kind of a committee do you have? A lot of these counties, a lot of the 7 counties already had standing public lands committees, so that they just utilize those public lands committees. Other counties had to form ad hoc committees, didn't have those in place. And so they devised special committees for the PLI. Just whatever works in your county. If you've got the architecture there already, great, use it. You may have to modify it a little bit and make sure it's diverse enough. Who's on that committee? It's important to populate the committee with not only a diversity of interests, but also a diversity of levels within that interest. You want to make sure your local associations are involved, your local OHV groups, not just the state OHV group, your local pro-wilderness groups, your local river users. A lot of times those are quiet groups that don't have a big budget, they don't make a lot of noise, but they're critical. And you want them there sitting next to the state wilderness group or the regional or national wilderness group and have them all talking together. So you want recreation people there, OHV, backpackers, bicycle. I mentioned earlier there were 8 special recreation areas that are in the bill for Grand County. Those are mainly bicycle and footpath recreation areas. Grand County is among our 7 counties. They're probably a little more green than the other 6. And they're just tickled pink with these recreation areas, things they couldn't have gotten otherwise through legislation, other than through legislation. And that was driven by committees who helped form those and plan for those recreation areas. You want to make sure that recreation is represented from the traditional recreationists, the family, who likes to drive to Jellystone Park or whatever, and put up their tent or rent their motel. Not just backpackers, not just hardcore OHVs. You want to just your bread and butter, salt, sort of vanilla type recreationists as well. Wildlife, national, state, local wildlife management, wildlife protection groups, Outdoor recreation outfitters, guides, etc. Of course, your pro-wilderness groups, your grazing groups, your local grazing associations, your farm bureau, your cattlemen's associations. We utilize the resources at times of Public Lands Council, which is a sort of a multi-state pro-grazing group. Oil and gas industry, you know, your producers, you want to, sometimes they like to operate more quietly, but you want to make sure you have a good dialogue with your producers in your area, for your county, wherever you're doing, what their goals are, what their concerns are. Are they threatening to leave if certain things don't happen, you know? Of course, you want all your federal agency people there. BLM, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service. You want to form good relationships. You want them in the cars with you when you go on the field trips. You want to yield to their expertise and their consultation, bringing them in as much as you can. You want legislators, Wyoming legislators involved. You know, even though they're there informally, it's very, very good to have them go on a field trip or two. Radio shows, sometimes when it's time to sell something, you know, or discuss something or entertain a debate. Native American groups are important too. Bring them in, even though like in Southeast Utah, the Navajos, of course, none of the lands that are the subject of PLI are tribal lands, but yet a lot of those lands are important to the Navajos. A lot of generations of going out and gathering pine nuts and doing different things on BLM lands, and they were amazing, the input San Juan County received from them. So those are just some quick thoughts about what worked for us and the process that we went through the 7 counties. One quick word about that. I mentioned 2 commissioners lost their jobs. One commissioner was voted out because he got ahead of his committee. He had a good committee, but frankly, he got ahead of them. And just started, you know, he sped up and got there pretty soon. They were in his rearview mirror, and the voters took it out on him for that. So you know, stick with your committees. What's worked is for you know, you assign a county commissioner, county council person to actually conduct the meetings, you know, and that's worked. So those are my thoughts on what we've been through in Utah.
All right, thank you, Mark. So now it's time for questions from you all. When we talk about stakeholders, I mean, this is it, right? These are the people in the room that you might find yourselves in one of these committees. So let's ask some questions. Sir.
Travis Becker, Fremont County. This question is for Mark. We want the public to know what's going on, but how involved did you get the press at what point in the process?
The first answer is that varied by county, okay? As a general rule, the press was not involved immediately, but probably somewhere in the early to mid-stream portion of the process. The press was often invited to committee meetings and open houses. The very initial type meetings were basically where every stakeholder would come with their list of wants. You know, just put your wants on the table. What are they? And of course, that's kind of a way of disassembling before you reassemble, right? Because it's almost chaotic. And it just was felt, it was felt that was just too much, rightly or wrongly, it was just felt that was too much to be processed by a reporter. But eventually, as lists began to formulate and positions began to gel, then the press got involved.
Okay. Another question, Mr. in the back.
You can yell. Okay. My question is for Dan. You had talked about an interest matrix, and I think as we
we talked about this a little in our local commission. One of the concerns is that you put someone on the committee and there's no buy-in by the national group or the state group and that sort of thing. And if you look at one of these areas, you know, one area maybe Trout Unlimited is interested in, but the other area they're not within your county. And I just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit to make sure that we get the real interest at the table.
Well, I think you're asking me for an answer I can't really give you because there's no such thing as perfection. Couple of things though. I think that, first of all, the county commissioners and the people that have been meeting this, you know, they know the people that know this land. So to a certain extent, you know, you use your local contacts, your local knowledge to represent those interests or make sure those interests are represented. You know, what I've seen done and what I've done personally on a smaller scale a couple of times is to get 4 or 5 of these people, maybe it's a rancher, it's a local grazing association, maybe it's a group, maybe it's a climber because we have a lot of rocks to climb. And we sit around the table and we just list all the interests of this particular landscape. Who recreates here, who has permits here, etc. And then we throw a bunch of candidates up there and we go out and talk to them and we try to find out, does this person really have the interest represented? Can he communicate back to that constituency and then come forward to the committee? And going through that exercise a couple of times, eventually it will work out. But there's nothing is 100% perfect. But I have a lot of confidence personally, you know, in the local people in the local commission that they know what that landscape represents and who's using that landscape and can come up with a good committee. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my take.
Thank you, Dan. All right, next question over here.
Yeah, this question is for Mark. This is Mark Newcomb from Teton County. It sounds like in Utah you have one county that was a little bit you know, greener, if you will, not that we do here in Wyoming. Teton County is even part of Wyoming. But at the start of the process, were the goals and objectives of that county substantially different from other counties? And if so, how was that kind of sorted out through the process?
Their goals were a little different than the other 6. There's some overlap, significant overlap. But you could look at a matrix. If you look at a matrix, you could tell that, you know, the flavor of Grand County's goals are a little different. It really wasn't a problem, and isn't a problem from my perspective, because we were very, very clear. UAC was very clear, and the delegation was very clear that each county, you know, answers to itself. Each county is the master of its own outcome, and you know, I think it's been remarkably not complex, not that hard to handle. Grand County's doing what Grand County wants, and that's the whole brand or flavor. That's how this whole thing has been branded. It's local driven. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. All right, Joe.
I would just add a little bit maybe to what Mark said when he talked about the significance of field trips. I've been more or less involved in this type of activities for quite a while. I was on the Force Task Force, the Governor Brucelosis Task Force, and one thing everybody up there has alluded to but didn't quite say the word is when we get together as a group of diverse interests, and especially if we go to the point of having a field trip on the ground where everybody's looking at the same thing together at the same time, discussing what should be done with the land, you develop trust. And trust is the key to good decision making at the local level. And I've repeated in groups over and over that the best natural resource decisions are always made at the local level by the local people working together on the ground. field trips is key to this process.
Anybody ready to respond to that? Thumbs up on that idea. All right, thank you, Joel. Well, I think we have time for 2 more questions. We have anybody? It's a critical issue. Steph.
Steph Hessler with the Wyoming.
Steph Hessler with the Wyoming Outdoor Council. I'm struggling a little with the idea of these committees based on sometimes county boundaries instead of a landscape or geographic perspective. Because my sense is that these collaborations work really well if you've got people who are really have ownership and or as I think Paul said, they really want something and they know the landscape or the area, and they're really willing to commit it because they're passionate about a place almost more than it is about maybe a county boundary. And so I'm wondering if any of the commissions have thought about a flexibility to look where they might have overlap with some other counties to consider a larger landscape approach. And also because a lot of people that use or constituency of these landscapes don't necessarily live right in that county, but are next door, and may even know those places better than some people in the county. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, Steph, we've kind of talked about this. Within Fremont County, we have 2 WSAs that the Sweetwater Rocks goes over into Natrona County, and Oregon Buttes is kind of Fremont and Sweetwater in most of that. Because of the design county-based, we're kind of limited because our jurisdiction are within our county lines. However, we recognize there are landscapes that will come out of there. And kind of as I've been thinking about this, when these committees are formed, there's going to be a period of time where they're going to be getting to know one another and trying to work out their group dynamics in a positive way. And if you can kind of get to know one another and before you get into these multi-county type situations, because I think you're gonna almost go into a redesign of a larger advisory committee. And I don't think we need our committee going with like Natrona. We're gonna have to decide how to have a good working group that will look at these multi-county landscapes and come up and then go back to each individual county. I don't think it's something that we can't overcome because like Natrona County, we know where the rocks are and we know that how they're going to look at it. So I don't think it's insurmountable, but I don't think we as county commissioners have the authority to tell Natrona or Sweetwater County, this is what we want. And yeah, it will be a little more, be a bigger job. And if you have your group dynamics worked out, you can consolidate into a bigger committee easier than just jump on that right to start with. So.
Just a quick comment about an experience in Utah that relates to your question. There's an area kind of generally referred to as the Greater Desolation Canyon Complex, several WSAs along Green River, literally Desolation Canyon, part of Green River, that affects Uinta, Carbon, Emory, and Grand counties, 4 of the 7 participating counties. And yes, because of the geography of that complex, yes, necessarily those counties, talk to each other about that, because the part of the 2.2 million of wilderness is a large part of that is a significant part of that is this Greater Desolation Canyon. But like Doug said, at the end of the day, you know, then each county has to go back and decide. So yes, collaboration on a landscape scale is important, but to the suggestion that somehow county authority is diluted into some greater sort of amorphous authority, that didn't work in Utah. That was not a model for Utah. Talking to each other on landscape scale issues, yes, but retention of local authority.
All right, I said two more questions, but I don't think we really have the time for another question. It's about 10 after, and we're getting into your lunch hour. So let's thank the panel. Thank you very much. I hope that during your lunchtime you will have conversations about the issues that we've just talked about and some other things that you might have concerns about or think about opportunities. This is a networking lunch. Take that time to network. We'll get started probably a little bit after 12:30, give you a full half